I'm Donald Moffat.
And I'm Heather Menzies. Logan's Run will not be on tonight.
But stay tuned for the Charlie Brown special and the Fat Albert Halloween special.
And we'll be back next Monday night.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
I'm Alex Ross.
The two pieces are sort of a type. They're both kind of recreations of artwork that existed in the 90s. In fact, this piece here for the Avengers is in most ways a recreation or a tribute to George Perez's poster version from the mid-90s, where he did a shot that featured in it a figure of Captain America that was very similar to what I've done here, positioning of the Vision or positioning of Hawkeye, and I believe a few other elements are very similar to that piece, and it's consciously so. I was building off that inspiration, but I kind of refitted my design to fill out bigger shots of the figures so that I was making a wider composition and getting in a lot of the same characters, but still not quite as many as what George himself did, because George's thing was always to try and get in the maximum amount of content into pieces that he did.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Happy to welcome David Pepose back to Word Balloon. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. We were on a panel together a couple months ago at C2E2, absolutely, with some other fine writers.
Yeah.
And you teased a few things that we could talk about now that they've come out, and also a big new thing that's coming up. Let's start with the new thing, if you don't mind. And that's Moon Knight, City of the Dead. What can you tell us about this?
I'm so excited to be doing this story. I've wanted to write Moon Knight at Marvel for some time. He was on the short list for my cast on Savage Avengers that we had to kind of trim down because I realized very quickly that I couldn't write as many characters as I wanted. And we were even going to have him in Arc 2, and then we also had to trim that down. But I remember both times I told my editor, Tom Brevoort, I said, man, it's killing me that I have to cut Moon Knight. I love Moon Knight. If there's ever an opportunity to do anything with him, I'd love to do it. And Tom is a great editor who's always listening. And so he said, all right, the anthology for Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood came a few months later. And he said, do you want in? So I did a fun story with Leonardo Romero called A Hard Day's Night. And it was kind of, I framed it as like The Hangover, but with Moon Knight, trying to figure out, like, I've got like a burn mark on my right arm. Which of my personalities did that? Or I have like a stab wound in my left shoulder. Oh no, that's a vermin claw. That was Jake Lockley. And people really responded well to that story. And so when Moon Knight has been pretty big since the Disney Plus show, and since Jed McKay's amazing run.
Jed had a great run. Yes.
Tom said, hey, we're looking to do a Moon Knight miniseries. I know you've mentioned interest in Moon Knight. Do you have any ideas? And so I thought long and hard about that, where I was kind of like, what speaks to Moon Knight in terms of his history, in terms of his questionable mental health, in terms of his legacy, and also sort of this character that straddles both the supernatural and the street level. And so I had an idea of what if Moon Knight would have to face all of the dead supervillains that he's put in the ground over the years. And that became the story that's now City of the Dead. It's the story of a young runaway is left for dead outside of the Midnight Mission. And while Mark Spector is able to bring him to Hunter's Moon, and they're able to sort of resuscitate him on the table, he's in a coma. He's in a vegetative state. If he's off the ventilator, he'll be dead in minutes. And so Hunter's Moon says, this is really tragic. I don't know what, it's so senseless. And Mark says, he's not dead yet. And as long as there's still a breath of life in him, he's a traveler of the night. And that means he's under my protection. And so Mark detaches his soul and ventures down to the City of the Dead to try to rescue this kid. and in so doing winds up teaming up with Layla Al Fawley from the Disney Plus show, who's going to be making her debut as the all-new Scarlet Scarab. So I've been pitching the story as like Inception meets Taken, with a little bit of Mr. and Mrs. Smith thrown in for good measure. So it's been a fun story. For those who've kind of followed my work over the years, my first book, Spencer in Locke, was kind of a street level noir story with a protagonist with questionable mental health. And in certain ways, City of the Dead is kind of the spiritual successor to that. It's sort of told at a bigger scale with more spectacle. But this is very much a supernatural story told through a noir lens. And we're doing some really fun stuff. Marcelo Ferreira is on art on the book, and he is just killing it. You might know him from Strange that he worked on with Jed McKay. Just doing some really cool stuff, not just with Moon Knight as a character. The City of the Dead feels so vibrant and lived in and dense. His design of the Scarlet Scarab is such a nice amalgamation from the Disney Plus show, but its own separate comics thing as well. And the villains. If you're a Moon Knight fan, we got a lot of deep cuts in that.
Cool.
But yeah, we'll just say we're going to be seeing an all new Legion of the Unliving that Mark is going to have to face down. And these are all people that have, I think, pretty legitimate beef with Mark. And that, he put them in the ground, and now they're looking to return the favor.
I understand. No, that's great, man. I remember reading the Doug Munch stuff from the 80s.
Yeah.
But I can't say that details stuck with me. But it was one of those direct market darlings that was like, oh, this is great. Moon
Knight reminds me in a lot of ways as like Daredevil. Daredevil is one of those books that has an amazing pedigree. You can think of Frank Miller, Brubaker, Bendis, Chip Zdarsky, dozens of people who have done some of their Mark Wade, people who've done some of their best ever industry work on Daredevil. And I feel like Moon Knight is kind of like that as well, where you have the Warren Ellis run, you've got the Jeff Lemire run, you've got what Jed is doing. Those are some lofty some lofty heights to try to reach. We really are kind of standing on the shoulders of giants with this. And it's really inspired me to try to bring my A game to this book. I've been asking myself with every issue, what is something that only Moon Knight can do? And I feel like this kind of mind-bending adventure that really speaks to the way that memory and perception and guilt all kind of interact and collide with one another. That's the City of the Dead in a nutshell. It is a purely psychoactive realm that can be dictated based on the contents of one's heart. And Mark's got a lot of blood in his hands, and it's something that he has constantly been struggling with. Sure. Because I think Moon Knight, to me, as a character, the thing that really resonates with me is he's a bad man who did bad things, who's trying to make good. And it's often out of his reach, but he always, no matter how hard he gets beaten up, he always gets he gets back on the horse and he tries. And that really resonates with me as a writer. Those are the characters I love writing. And so I feel like Mark and I are a good fit. And I've been having a lot of fun writing he and Layla's story in City of the Dead. And also just kind of getting to ride shotgun a little with Jed. Jed is such a fantastically talented writer. And the way that kind of everything came together was, for those who aren't aware, City of the Dead kind of spins off of the events of Moon Knight 25, which is kind of a big anniversary issue. So you'll want to get both of those books. Kind of read 25, and then you can jump right into City of the Dead. And the way that kind of came into being was when I had been asked to do something for Moon Knight, I said, let's do City of the Dead. Let's have Layla as the Scarlet Scarab. And I think I'd written like an issue. And then Jed was working on 25, and he had independently, not knowing that I was even doing a miniseries at all, said to Tom, hey, what if we introduce Layla? And it's Tom Brevoort, kind of the mastermind at all of this. He goes, 25 and City of the Dead are coming out in the same month. We can kind of dovetail these two stories together. And the way that Jed really teed up the ball in such a cool way. And so we were able to lock our stories together in a really fun, in a really fun way. That like, it was a lot of serendipity. But I think it speaks to how talented a writer Jed is, that like, I read kind of his ideas of what he was envisioning, and I was like, oh yeah, we can fit that in like beautifully. It adds in a whole nother layer to their relationship. And I think for those fans who are out there who have been maybe understandably nervous, saying, oh, is this going to be like, are you replacing Marlene? Are you trying to lean in to a purely Disney Plus recreation of Layla? And the answer is no to both things. We're of course drawing some inspiration from the Disney Plus show. We're trying to bring in the things about Layla that people liked, her personality and the way that she bounced off of Moon Knight. But she's her own separate character, and she's one that's got her own separate history with Mark. And I promise when you read it, you'll kind of understand why hasn't Layla popped up so far. We've got that covered. And it makes perfect sense when you read it. But yeah, it's just been a really fun experience, and one that it's quickly becoming my favorite thing that I've written at Marvel to date.
That's cool. Of course, back in the day, there was always that knock that, and especially given guys like Munch and Denny O'Neil and Sienkiewicz, for that matter, who all had histories with Batman and stuff, and that Batman where the Venn diagram, kind of interlinks with Batman. Is that something that you stay aware of but keep your distance? Where do you feel, as far as that kind of similar vibe of
it's a good question. I think for me, I think maybe the way they move, like the way that, like, just like in a pure like choreography sense, I can see the overlap. But I think Mark's level of self-loathing is very different than Batman's. Batman is tortured and brooding, but I don't think he blames himself. I know the Christopher Nolan movie teased it a little bit, but I don't think he really blames himself for his parents' deaths. I think he's very mad about his parents' deaths, and that kind of fuels his war on crime.
I'm with you.
Mark has legitimate beef with himself. He was a mercenary,
right?
And without spoiling too much, that is kind of a part of the through line of City of the Dead. Is Mark hates himself. Mark puts on a mask and a cape every night and punishes himself because of what he did in his past. And the idea of Moon Knight, the idea of it, of that costumed identity, is sort of, it's a tool of redemption. It's, can he save enough lives to balance the scales? And the answer is ongoing. I think the other thing that really separates him to me is that it's the supernatural adjacent elements. It's Khonshu. It's that he's a little more comfortable with magic in general. I mean, especially with the new Midnight Mission basically being a haunted house. That's super cool. The added mythology of somebody like Hunter's Moon, who knows the Egyptian lore, and that's going to be something that's going to be helpful. Adding in, new avatars like the Scarlet Scarab. And so those kind of, I think, help set Moon Knight apart from Batman in my mind. Batman is maybe a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife. You can throw Batman into like any genre, any story, and obviously it works. I think Moon Knight is a little bit more specified, but I think his appeal is broadening, and I don't think you can't call him like Magic Batman. I think it's very much sort of like, I think the Warren Ellis run really kind of helped also differentiate him, that he's got all the different costumes, but also just like the way he talks. Moon Knight, I think, is probably one of the more fun characters to write because there's a precedent for him having these amazing one-liners. Like, just he's able to say all these really badass things that like other characters might be like, that's a little much, but not for Moon Knight. Like, that perfectly fits the character, is that he's a little off balance, he's a little unhinged, and so he's going to say something that's a little over the top, and you're going to like wet yourself if you're a supervillain. And that actually has been kind of the most fun part of writing the character to me. And it certainly was writing Black, White, and Red. It's just like what's the hardest thing you can make Mark Spector say? It is kind of a game with myself where I'm like, I turned in an issue for City of the Dead recently, where like the last line of it, I was like, oh, that's like the sickest line I could have possibly ended an issue on. That's part of the appeal of writing the character to me. And I think also, Batman's been around for so long. The people who write Batman, I'm in awe of them. It's like, how do you find new ground to new storytelling ground to cover with that character who's been told in every story you can possibly imagine?
80 years. Yeah.
Whereas Moon Knight, it's surprisingly fertile territory. It's a character who I think up until the Warren Ellis run, really, I think a lot of people overlooked him. A lot of people saw him as like a joke, or a niche thing. And I think now, thanks to Warren, thanks to Jeff Lemire, thanks to Jed especially, I think people are starting to realize like, oh, this is a character that's like really cool, and that there's a lot of world building that can be done. And that was sort of the challenge that I gave myself, was seeing all the world building Jed did and saying, okay, what can I add to the mix that in theory, a writer like Jed or anybody else down the line, maybe they can revisit, maybe they can kind of take some pieces from that. How can we add to what's already an increasingly vibrant tapestry for Mark Spector?
Cool, man. David has a question. He wants to know, will the City of the Dead touch on Mark's Jewish background?
Yeah, there are some elements there. I actually just wrote a scene about that yesterday. Yes, it's one of those things that, is it going to be front and center of the story? No, but it is something that I would not write this series without touching upon in some form or fashion. And yeah, suffice to say, I have always found it to be, especially as somebody who is Jewish, I always found it to be an interesting wrinkle in the character is, it's the first commandment, man. Like, you're literally a son of a rabbi who is sort of pledging fealty to a foreign god. And how do you reconcile that? And so that is something that is going to be mentioned in the book. Is it front and center? No, but there's a lot of ground we're covering in this one. Yes, I'm also the person who mentioned Mark Spector going to Hebrew school in Black, White, and Red. So his Jewishness is never far from my mind.
Excellent. Lovable Scarecrow wants to know, and he beat me to asking the question, will Stephen Grant or Jake Lockley also make appearances?
You'll have to read to find out.
All right, fair enough. Good answer. That's terrific, man. No, that's excellent, man. So 5 issues for this one?
It's 5 issues. And yeah, I wrote this with the goal in mind to be like, how can I make this as evergreen a story as possible? And yes, we are going to be kind of spinning off of the events of Moon Knight 25, but like, I think especially as a miniseries, as somebody who like doesn't want to step on Jed's toes,
sure.
It's just sort of like, okay, how can this be its own thing that, if Jed or any future writer down the line wants to pick up those threads, they can, but otherwise, like, if you just want to read this as single issues or as the eventual trade, you can, and you can get something out of it. So yeah, 5 issues, I'm very excited with it. And yeah, we're kind of at the finish line with the scripting right now. And it's been a hell of a book. I can't say enough good things about it. I've been having so much fun, and Marcelo has just been such a tremendous artist on this book. And I'm so thrilled with what he's putting it out with this. And our cover artist, Rod Reese, has been doing some terrific
Rod's
stuff.
the man.
Love Rod. I met him at a New York Comic Con last year, and I told him that he was like the second coming of Sienkiewicz. And so having him,
I'm sure he adored that, and I absolutely agree with you. That's great.
Having him do the covers is amazing. Bill Sienkiewicz actually did a variant for issue 2, which
that's great.
Kind of blew my mind.
Sure.
To see. And yeah, we just got some amazing stuff. We've got a foil variant by Pepe Larraz. Davey Go did a really incredible cover of the Scarlet Scarab that's like instantly iconic. And we got a Scotty Young cover, which just is like
excellent,
so fun. So yeah, it's as somebody who like still feels like he's kind of making his bones at Marvel a bit. This feels like a real treat to be able to kind of work in a book at this level. And the art talent that has been attached to this book has been nothing short of miraculous. So I'm really thrilled and grateful, and I can't wait for readers to get to see it.
That's great. Does it start in August? When does it start?
It starts July. It actually the first issue of City of the Dead comes out the Wednesday of San Diego. So
perfect.
If you're at San Diego Comic-Con, find me at my booth. I will have some copies of City of the Dead, but get them fast because I think I'm only going to have like 80 to 100 copies, and when they are gone, they are gone.
Fair enough. No, sounds great, man. That's excellent. Let's see here. And this is a good transition. David says good stuff. He's looking forward to the Vader black, white, and red story as well. And let's talk about that story because you were kind enough to send that to me. Now, is it out?
It came out 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
But yeah, Darth Vader, black, white, and red. Boy, that was such a fun opportunity. It was interesting because around the holidays got very busy for me, which, as somebody who doesn't really celebrate holidays like Hanukkah, like I was kind of like, what am I doing? I guess I have a lot of work. But I just finished the first issue of City of the Dead. I worked on a bake-off for a bigger project that didn't quite take off, but I'm still very happy with what came together. And then I suddenly, in the span of like 3 weeks, got emails about like, do you want to do Spider-Man Unlimited or Spider-Verse Unlimited story? Do you want to do this Hulk annual? And do you want to do Darth Vader, black, white, and red? And I said yes, just all of them.
Oh, that's great.
It was, like my inner 8-year-old was like just having the time of his life on all of this. And, my story for Vader was I said, listen, what do you think if we did like Darth Vader versus the legally distinct version of the Xenomorphs? I was like, if I only have, I think I had 11 pages, 11 or 12 pages to write that story. I was like, that would be kind of like a cool matchup.
Sure.
Just like take the two biggest sci-fi franchises and just like throw them together and see what happens. And my editors, Mark Panacea and Mikey Baxo, who really kind of took point, and Danny Kasem, they were all super excited for that story. And it was great. I feel like Alessandro Vitti did the art on it, and he really deserves a lot of credit for making that story work.
Hey, let's take a look at that art right now with an image.
Yeah.
Boom. Look at that. I honestly, man, and also, Vitti's always great. But it really, just the fact that it is black, white, and red and everything really makes it pop in a great way. It's gorgeous.
They picked the perfect artist for that story. Because it's like, I think he loved the idea of drawing Vader, and being able to draw these monsters. I think like really spoke to his style and the kind of horror style. I think he was able to lean into that in a way that he doesn't always get to in all of his stories. I told Alessandro I've been a fan of his since Red Lanterns. It's been a minute. So when they told me I was working with him, I was so excited. And yeah, he did such a spectacular job. I remember we went back and forth a little bit on like the alien design. Sort of, what did we talk about? We talked about the Zerg from StarCraft. We talked about the Brood from Marvel. There was some other species, and then obviously the Xenomorphs as sort of the big influence. And it was a really fun experience. We're kind of threading the needle a little bit, because it is a licensed book. So it's not just dealing with the Marvel editors. We're also interfacing with Lucasfilm And
Sure.
and so sort of figuring out like what do they feel comfortable with, and
Right.
like what things how do they want to kind of separate this from the Alien franchise so they're not sort of stepping on anybody's toes. I think it's a misconception that like, oh well, they're all owned by Fox and it's all owned by Disney, and so you can do whatever you want. Boy, if it was that easy. I wish it was that easy. I mean, I can't tell you how brokenhearted I was, for example, during Savage Avengers. They were doing a bunch of Predator covers, and I asked my editor Tom Brevoort, I was like, we're not getting a Conan versus the Predator cover, are we? And he was like, no. He so much as said that's probably more hassle than it's worth, because there's a lot of different offices that you have
Absolutely
to jump between. So working with Lucasfilm was great. Like they gave some really good feedback in terms of like, how do we get Vader's voice down and what do they want with the alien? I can tell you, like, I guess the book's out. I can spoil a little bit for you. The climax of the story is we find out that Vader has been infected by these aliens. And so there's like tentacles that are starting to kind of burst out of his chest. And he uses the dark side of the Force to kind of like rip them out because he's just that hardcore. And the original thing that I had pitched was I was like, what if he had like an alien egg and like embryo inside of him and he force choked it to death? And Lucasfilm, quite rightly, it was like, that's a little much for us. Can we scale that back a little bit?
Oh well.
So I was like, it's totally fair. But they were really fantastic to work with, and Mark and Danny and Mikey especially. Mikey really took point on that story in a big way, and was just such a great editor to work with. That was like, I remember seeing Star Wars as a kid at my grandmother's house. Like I remember Alderaan exploding left a big impact on me as a 6-year-old. And so like getting to write Vader, I was telling my partner this, is that I was like, I think the only reason I was able to keep my cool writing Vader was I was also writing Spider-Man at the exact same time. And the two things, like either one would have blown my mind on their own, but they kind of counterbalanced each other, that I was able to keep my cool. So yeah, it's just, I'm really happy with how that story came together. And I love that people got the reference and sort of saw what we were doing. I mean, I think a lot of my career, just dating back to Spencer and Locke, is there's a little bit of like a bootleg sensibility to it. Like you can't use Calvin and Hobbes, but if you squint, you kind of know what we're doing. And so the fact that I was able to kind of do that with like one of the biggest franchises on the planet, like that's fun. That's something I'll probably tell my kids someday. It was just really, it was really cool to be able to kind of like add a little something to a galaxy far, far away. And if they ever want me back, I'm always happy to answer the call.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question. Was are you pitching? Are you
I all I can say is I did pitch them on one other idea, and the characters were not available. That's all I can. Okay. That's all I can say. But it speaks to. I was a '90s kid, and so like there are certain '90s Star Wars characters that I'm like, oh, I'd love to do something with them, and I'm probably the only one. Never say never. I just, I'm sure if I think of the right story, Mikey's going to be the first person I email. So knock on wood, one of these days, hopefully I'll figure something out.
Okay, fair enough. Now you mentioned obviously too, having to, deal with Lucasfilms as far as vetting and making sure, you're doing it the right way. Yeah. With Savage Avengers, first of all, I'm bummed, but I understand that obviously the use of Conan has reverted back to the Howard estate.
Sure.
And now they're doing their books. Is it Titan that has the
Titan? Yep.
Yeah. And that's fine. Whatever. I'm kind of bummed though, because you can't access your issues of Savage Avengers on Marvel Unlimited.
Yeah,
it's too bad, man.
That's something that happened with the original run as well. Jerry's run is also not available on Marvel Unlimited.
Yeah.
I assume that was some whatever deal that they made
with
Conan properties. it's funny because it's like we never got a chance to talk about that book, and it's because
I know. Well, it was
know,
funny. I want to say, at least, and by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were ready to talk.
We were ready to
and
talk.
Then the announcement came that, all right, the use of Conan is kind of in
And
jeopody right now. So take the story from there.
I was told lay low for a few days. So I had to lay low.
No problem.
Yeah, basically, for those who haven't read my work in Savage Avengers, I had pitched it as Sword and Sorcery Terminator. I said, what if we did Conan versus the Terminator? And by Terminator, I mean Deathlock, as sort of Marvel's next best thing. And a team of superheroes kind of gets caught in the crossfire, and they're all stranded in the Hyborian Age. And so when I had pitched that, I had sort of, my editor, Tom Brevoort, and I, we kind of hammered out a story arc idea that was like, we're going to spend 5 issues in the distant past and 5 in a dystopian future. And then if there's room for more, I have an idea for more, but like otherwise that is a good sort of beginning and end. And I had been told kind of early on, they're like, do you even want to write Conan? And I was like, yeah, like, when else am I going to get an opportunity to write Conan? And so I had said, though, I was like, listen, if we don't want to keep Conan, this is a perfect time. We can just drop him off. Like, he's at home. He just stays there, or if he goes to the far future, he takes like the long way there or something like that. And I had written 2 issues when I kind of got the word from on high that, hey, the license is not going to be renewed past this time. So you have until, I think I was told, issue 8 to write them out. And I said, well, based on the way we're breaking down the arcs, that means I'm going to write them out at 5. No big deal. The only thing that was kind of a bummer was just the kind of the way that news came out. I imagine that there was like a plan to like roll this out in a controlled fashion.
Yeah.
And instead, like the news kind of just like blew the Saturday before my first issue. And it was a bummer because, I can talk a little bit about it now, but like at the time, I think it's a misconception that a lot of fans have. And I totally understand why, that like they will ask you questions that like you can't really answer without like getting in hot water with your bosses. Like,
sure,
I can't, there was no way I could speak about like the future of a license at Marvel. And so people asking me, I was just like, I can't say anything.
Right.
But I had people asking me, is your book getting pulped? No, like just I'm sure you feel this way being on your side of the table, and I've been on that same side of the table, back in my Newsarama days. But it's the thing I always have to say is like, it may be news to you, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's news to me. Like I had known for that news came out in May, so I had known for 9 months.
Wow.
So like this was not new to me. I had long since written Conan out of the book by the time it came out.
Sure.
So did my plans change? Only in terms of the second arc, slightly. And by that, it just meant we were a little more refined with it. We went to the year 2099 for arc 2, and we put it Punisher 2099 as the new lead. And I think that worked out for the better, honestly.
Pumpkin Time agrees and says the second half of Savage Avengers was perhaps even stronger without Conan. So there you go, man.
I liked the idea of sort of making it a stealth Exiles book. I loved Exiles.
I'm a massive fan of Exiles. I always tell Winnick that all the time. Go on.
If I had known then what I do now of kind of how to promote my stuff at Marvel a little better, I would have probably led with like, oh, if you like Exiles, this is a book for you. But at the time, I thought I kind of had to keep the time travel thing under wraps. I think that second arc was really the only thing that changed, and it was just making it 2099 versus kind of a more nondescript dystopian future. I think the original plan was the cult of Set was going to have found Deathlock tech, and so then it's sort of how does time diverge with all that. And we managed to kind of do the next best thing where it's Alchemax finds a Deathlock arm, and they build like a Deathlock army, and then Ultron takes over the Deathlock army. I was really happy with how that book came together. I understand, I think there were some people who were disappointed that we were going to be losing Conan. I remember seeing people say, oh, I'm not going to pick up the book if I don't know that it's going to get X amount of runway. And I think that maybe is like a conservative type of thinking that, I think comic fans can be guilty of. I certainly can be at times. And I really appreciate all the fans that went out and got the book and gave us a shot. We were stepping in some huge shoes. Jerry Dugan wrote a version of Savage Avengers that everybody loved. And a lot of people did not know who I was.
Sure.
It was my first ever Marvel assignment. And they gave us a shot. And I think a lot of that speaks to also Carlos Magno, the artist on the book, who just is a superstar in the making. I cannot wait to see what he's working on next. He made that book larger than life. He and Espen Gruntagjern, our colorist. It was every issue looked like an event. And so, boy, what I wouldn't do to work with Carlos again. He's just such a stellar artist. I missed that book. I loved that book. I'm so glad that was my first assignment at Marvel. I couldn't have asked for a better first book. And, the only thing I tell Tom Brevoort all the time that I miss writing a team book. So every chance I get, I'm like, if there's ever an opportunity to write another team book. But so far, I have been a solo hero central and having a great time with it.
Understood. Let's see. All right. Pumpkin Time also wants to know any interest in writing Miguel OHara and what your thought process was going into 2099.
Miguel's having a moment right now. I don't know if you saw Across the Spider-Verse yet.
Not yet. I got to tell you, David, I'm a little bummed to learn that it's a part 1.
I know.
But I hear everyone who tells me they have seen it is like, you're gonna have a great time regardless. So I'm like, all right.
It's a work of art. I saw it opening night.
I believe it. Yeah.
Miguel. Listen. I love writing spider people in general. I've been lucky enough to write a handful of them. I've written Peter. I've written Miles. Miles being kind of the heart of Savage Avengers. But also I wrote the original Miles for a short for Carnage Reigns. Flash Thompson, love that guy.
Yeah.
I wrote a Venom in Extreme Venomverse, the life model Venom, the cyborg Venom. And then Carnage, who I love writing Carnage. I don't know. I didn't expect that, but I had a blast writing him. So I love writing spider people. I try to bother Nick Lowe every so often about spider related stuff. And Devin Lewis has certainly let me do some symbiote related stuff. So yeah, if the opportunity was offered, I'm sure I would not say no. I'm sure I'd find something fun to do, but he's in great hands with Steve Orlando. He and Justin Mason are doing just really stellar work on Spider-Man 2099 Dark Genesis. As for going to 2099, I grew up on that. Like I said, I'm 90s trash.
Sure.
And so the idea of kind of going to like the dark, like Terminator 2 Judgment Day version of 2099, that like even saying that sentence scratches my lizard brain. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. I loved that. Yeah, you had like these recognizable characters. You had Spider-Man, and then you had Punisher, and you had Doom. All of whom we got in some form or fashion in Savage Avengers. But also just like the villains were like so weird and crazy, and I think that was sort of my favorite was when they kept just adding in new villains to the mix. I understand like the impulse to also kind of go back and do like versions of they had like Vulture, for example, like Vulture 2099. But my favorite was when they did, and I'm a hypocrite because I used Jigsaw 2099 and I loved it. So who am I to complain? But yeah, it was so fun. Like it was it's the same way that Hackers, that movie, like sees, saw like what cutting edge technology looks like. And now you see it now and like, it's still a great movie, but like you see it as like, it's a little bit kitsch. And that's how I feel about 2099 is like, it was, it was the early 90s trying to figure out like, oh, what's the future going to look like? and it's its own kind of weird cyberpunk aesthetic. I
Yeah.
love all the 2099 fake cuss words. That just I love it. And yeah, I think the foundational blocks of that are really cool.
David,
And,
am I misremembering? Wasn't there also the Fantastic Four 2099
there
where
was a
it was
Fantastic Four.
like year one FF
Yep.
thrown into the future, so they're still kind of innocent and figuring themselves out up against the 2099 period.
It was. I mean,
that was my favorite 2099 story, honestly.
there was a lot. Like, it's funny, I think my favorite of the 2099s is probably Doom.
And I like Doom as well. And that's funny because Mike wants to know, as we're talking about Doom, have you any specific Doom stories you would like to tell? Feels like he's got that. He gets that type of character.
Not presently at the moment. It's because I'd never thought about it until you just asked that question. Doom is such a fun character, though. And I will say, I wasn't expecting to write him a ton in Savage Avengers. He kind of got thrown in more at the last minute. I'll tell you another little behind the scenes bit on that book as well, which was my original outline was going to have the Savage Avengers of 2099 playing a very big part in that whole thing instead of having a cameo in the last issue. And Tom rightly was like, are you sure you can fit 14 characters in a 20-page issue month after month after month? And I tried, man. I wrote the beat sheets. I was really trying to figure out, could I possibly do this? And the answer is no, I cannot do that. And so that's when I kind of pared it down to like, okay, we're going to have Punisher and Doom as the characters. And then we will have the Savage Avengers of 2099 show up at the end of that roster of the characters that I wanted to throw in there. But yeah, Doom is such an interesting character. I think he's my second favorite Marvel villain after Magneto. But I feel like that is like dealer's choice. If you ask somebody who's your favorite Marvel villain, and if they tell you Magneto, Doctor Doom, or Doctor Octopus, or I guess maybe Green Goblin, but I think they're in like good company. So yeah, I know Ryan North did a really cool Doctor Doom story recently in the Fantastic Four 700, which felt like a nice kind of callback to his first issue, which was sort of like his first issue was a Groundhog Day issue, and this was Doom, his perfectionism killing him, where he was sort of like going back in a loop trying to stop the Baxter Building from being kind of like shot through time. And just him failing over and over and over and over again. And Ryan's a smart guy. I like him a lot. And he's a nice guy, which is like doubly problematic. It's like all that talent and you're nice too. Like, ugh. But yeah, his Doom was fantastic. But yeah, I think like most Marvel characters, I think if I was offered a chance, you better believe I'd run with it.
Cantwell did a great miniseries of Doom as well,
Yeah.
or Nike series. God, it's there was my that's yeah. I don't remember the hardware, and I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
But regardless, yeah, no, it was a pleasure reading that Doom story as well recently. So no, I'm with you. Let's see here. What else have we got? Pumpkin Time says your Flash was so good, and we'll love to see you on a symbiote book.
Nice. The symbiotes are in great hands right now. I had a lot of fun doing Extreme Venomverse. Devin Lewis. So Devin's been really generous offering me work. I like him a lot, and I think I've worked with him and his wife Christina Harrington at Aftershock. She was really the lead editor on Scouts Honor, so I like them both a lot. And yeah, Devin, what did we work on? We worked on Elektra, Black, White, and Blood last year. That wound up being my first published Marvel credit. I kind of jumped in sort of late in the game and did a quick story with Elektra and Black Widow. And Devin was nice enough to reach out to me for Extreme Venomverse because he knows I'm a 90s Marvel guy. And from every interaction I've had with him, he seems to be at least appreciative of the era. And so he was saying, we want to do a version of Cyborg Spider-Man, but for Venom. And so he said, remember the introduction to Carnage where like Eddie Brock is in prison and Carnage is his cellmate, and then the symbiote breaks in and frees Eddie, and the little bit of symbiote's still there. He was like, well, what if there's like, it's not Eddie? What if like SHIELD has put it like an LMD decoy to basically be like, let's draw out this symbiote and cage it before it hurts anybody else again. And he got Ken Lashley to draw it. And as soon as he said Ken Lashley, I was kind of like, my brain flashed back to me reading Excalibur during Age of Apocalypse.
Sure.
And I was like, yeah, I have to take that 100%. So yeah, symbiotes are really fun. I mean, I feel like a broken record. I feel really bad for saying it. I mean, like they're in great hands right now. I feel like Al Ewing and Ram V and Alex Packnadel are all doing fantastic stuff with them. I loved writing Flash Thompson. I would certainly do it again in a heartbeat. In particular, if I could get him on another team book, I would do that in a heartbeat. But yeah, Flash was probably my favorite character to write in Savage Avengers. His voice came the most naturally to me. It was always a close fight between him and Elektra as who was my favorite character to write in any particular issue. So I'm glad you liked it. Thank you. And never say never. There's nothing on the plans right now, but if I get the call, I would certainly endeavor to try to find something cool.
Excellent, man. Well, the last time we talked at that C2E2 panel, you were teasing your Hulk annual.
Yeah.
And, turned out great.
Thank you.
Fun story. I certainly recognized a couple of the Easter egg characters that you popped in there, which was great. You feel free to talk about that. One of your buddies.
Yeah. So, without spoiling too much, I had come up with, I had worked on like a story outline, with Will Moss over something that didn't wind up panning out. But I really liked working with him, and I told him like, hey man, if anything ever pops up, I hope you'll keep me in mind. And so a few months later, Will emails me and he goes, hey man, we're doing a Hulk annual. It's sort of bridging the end of Donny Cates and Ryan Otley's run into the next run. And I had known, because I'm friends with Philip Kennedy Johnson. He and I had talked, and so I was like, oh, I know Phillips is coming up. And so they said, listen, you've got 25 pages, and we're kind of thinking of like something that like we can kind of fit in the continuity. Like we don't want it to be like super firm one way or the other. Do you have any ideas? And for me, whenever I don't have an idea of something, I go back to kind of my checklist of what are the types of things I'd like to write. And then I try to reverse engineer from that. Hulk is a character that terrifies me. When I was a kid, I got 4 Marvel comics. My parents gave it to me, and it hooked me for life. And one of them was like, it was Amazing Spider-Man 346, so Spider-Man versus Venom right before they go to the island. There was an issue of Captain America. I'm trying to remember the number, but it was him and Jack Frost fighting an ice worm. An issue of Silver Surfer where it was just Adam Warlock and Drax fighting each other in the Soul Gem. I had no idea what was going on. And then an issue of the Incredible Hulk where Hulk gets poisoned, and so he's having heart attacks, and he pours toxic waste on the Abomination's face. I was in preschool reading this. So suffice to say, that was like my scary comic for a while. It was kind of the one that like I would carry all of my comics with me, and eventually Infinity War #2 that made me realize they all do each other, and that really took me that was the one that kind of spooked me. And the Hulk is a character, really, he's intimidating because he represents kind of the biggest and most blinding emotion in the human experience. There are whole industries of people trying to learn how to deal with their rage because it's so blinding and so overwhelming. It's really like a force of nature. And so as a result, like the Hulk was always kind of an intimidating character for me as a force of nature. And then that's what made me think, oh, well, there are like storm chasers out there what if somebody did a story about Hulk chasers? And on my list of things that I've always wanted to write was a found footage comic. And I never really thought of a good way to do it, because do you do that as a graphic novel and kind of go more extended with it? That's a big gamble for, for one thing. And, if you try to break it up into single issues on a monthly basis, that's its own kind of thing.
Sure.
So when they said you've got 25 pages to tell a Hulk story, I was like, all right, I know my runway is like, it's long for a single issue, but it's just one issue. This is the opportunity. This is the chance that I get to tell this found footage story. And so I pitched it to Will and Michelle Marchesi, my editors on the book, and they were really enthusiastic about it, which is great. In particular, I think we kind of bonded a little over the Mole Man. I wrote him as particularly creepy in that book. But really the long and short of my Hulk annual, it's called the Viridian Project. And it's about a documentary crew that is making a film about the Hulk. And not just about like the Hulk himself, but his impact on a small New Mexico town, which we find out was the civilian annex to Los Diablos missile base, which is where they invented the gamma bomb. And that story, it really spoke to kind of my past as a journalist. A lot of people don't know this about me, but my first job out of college, besides moonlighting at Newsarama, I worked as a reporter for a newspaper in rural Massachusetts. I worked for the Berkshire Eagle. I was there about 2.5 years. And the Berkshires, for anyone who hasn't been there, it was really interesting, especially back then. It was I got a job as the recession was like really getting bad. It was Martin Luther King Day 2009 is when I started there.
Oh, geez, yeah.
So it was really, it was the very beginning of the Obama administration, and the economy was in the toilet.
Right.
But Berkshire County in particular, it used to be a GE town, and when GE left, it really rocked the economy in a way that while I was there, the Berkshires were still trying to figure out like what direction was their economy and their county going to be in. There were people who I would hear all the time say like, well, when GE comes back, and and just because that was what they knew. Yeah. And so I drew upon a lot of that for the Viridian Project, where this is a town that they had an economic symbiosis with the missile base, and then when the Hulk kind of blew everything up, the missile base shuts down, and suddenly these people are adrift. And so they wind up sort of resorting to kind of a controversial method of fracking that uses gamma. And as we find out, that gamma is leaking into the Mole Man's kingdom and slowly driving him and all of his creatures murderously insane. So our documentary crew kind of winds up in the middle of all that. Basically ground zero of a Hulk versus Giganto fight. And we're seeing the whole thing through the lens of the camera. Yeah. So Kaio Mahato, who's the artist in this book, he deserves a medal, probably a Purple Heart, for that book, because
was he injured? Was he injured while making it?
I mean, probably at least psychologically. That was a technically challenging and very demanding book on like everybody involved, because there was only so much room we could cheat, like we wanted to add in little bits of comic flourishes. And so sometimes in the paneling, we'd have like the paneling kind of go at an angle, at a angle to show that the camera had turned.
Sure.
But it was how do we kind of play it as fair as we can with the found footage conceit while still kind of threading in little bits of comic book storytelling. So for example, like all of our dialogue was with electronic balloons to make it very clear that this is a recording. Edgar Delgado, our colorist, I kept asking like, where can we throw in distortion? Where can we throw in static? Where can we throw in the little Gauss bars on the video, just to make it, just so readers don't forget. Or if, can we switch to night vision? Just so the readers don't forget what kind of book this is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's probably the most experimental thing I've done at Marvel. I think by a wide margin. And I'm very happy with the people who gave it a shot. I think Gary Frank also, I think we owe a great deal of gratitude to him for that amazing cover that he did.
I didn't realize this is Gary. That's fantastic.
Great. And the funny
I love
thing
Gary.
is,
Gary's amazing. Yeah.
Synchronicity. That cover was actually the first part of the project that was put together. That they had that cover before they had me.
Well, it's an easy, that's an easy stock, image
and
to put on any story and everything. But no, it's great.
I thought it fit really well with the content of the story itself, and it was such a fun experience because it's always funny. This always happens to me, and it's happened to me 3 times now. That anytime that I tell my partner, this is the hardest character I could ever write at Marvel, I inevitably get asked to write that character like within a month. I said that for Fantastic Four before they asked me to do Fantastic Four. They asked me to do that for Hulk. Then they asked me to do Hulk. And the next thing that my next project that they're, I think, going to be announcing sometime in the fall is the next character that I was like, oh, this would be really hard. And then and it does make you kind of think in your feet and figure out like, okay, well, now I'm being asked to do it. Like, how do I make this sound like me in a way that I can make this feel like a book that I would want to read. And so I think that's been like a fun way to kind of level up a little bit as a writer. But yeah, that Hulk story, I'm really proud of it. It was just, and I'm really grateful to Will and Michelle that they let me do it. And, I find for me it's a question that I find myself asking more and more whenever I do work at Marvel and I will be doing this anywhere I go now. It's what's the runway? Because I think that if you figure out the runway, then you can kind of write for it.
When you say the runway, is that the amount of real estate that going in, you're getting 25 pages, for example?
It's like, how many pages do I have for this? How many issues do I have for this is another
one. Certainly.
Because like a lot of, if I have 5 issues, all right, that gives me kind of one big, almost like movie style kind of structure for a thing. Whereas if you have a one shot, you're kind of like, okay, it's going to be a little more character driven. Whereas if you have a 10 issue thing like Savage Avengers, like I knew going in that I would have at least a 10 issue runway. So I was kind of able to kind of make it a bigger epic.
Two joining stories, but
but even like, I did that story. I did a story in Carnage Reigns recently. I did like a 5-page backup with Miles Morales. And I remember talking with Devin. They were like, okay, we want to do a story kind of about Miles and Carnage's history. And Devin was really smart that he said, Miles got turned into a symbiote during, I think it was Extreme Carnage. I think it's Extreme or Absolute Carnage. And that they've never really examined the emotional fallout for that before. And so I was like, okay, that would be kind of, let's do that. Let's explore that. And because we're telling this at the end of the issue, let's do it from Miles's dad's perspective.
Ooh,
so it's sort of, you have this story where it's every parent, when their kid stays out late, gets worried. But what happens when your son is Spider-Man? And the worst day of a young Spider-Man's life is like, and then you flash back to him remembering getting turned into a symbiote and being stuck in Carnage's mind and the mind of a serial killer. And so that one, it's like, okay, you've got 5 pages to tell this. So you got to write it really tight. And like, it's really kind of like it's like a scene in 2 halves, essentially. Or maybe 3 scenes, depending on how you kind of break it down.
Okay.
So yeah, I think at least that's the way I tend to approach it. Is like,
sure,
I need to know my page runway. I do first. John Layman gives me crap about this all the time because he writes dialogue first, and I don't know how he does it. My goal as a writer is to write less and to show more, and that's something I'm constantly trying to do with each new project. So I don't know how people like write dialogue first and then panel it later. I would be writing 100-page issues like every single time. It's so yeah, knowing my runway on a page-to-page basis is like exactly the way I do all my work.
Makes sense. As we wrap up, you mentioned Scout's Honor, of course, which is a great creator-owned thing you brought to Aftershock.
Thank you.
Geez, honestly, David, a lot of your creator-owned stuff, I was always intrigued by the premises and stuff. I don't, and obviously you're very busy with your Marvel work right now. Where are you with your creator-owned stuff?
I've got more stuff coming. I'm going to be announcing another creator-owned book very soon. Soon. I don't know exactly when the publisher is planning on announcing it, but could be very soon.
You had that sci-fi. Sorry to interrupt, but you had that sci-fi kind of space race.
Yeah, Grand Theft Astro. We're still working on that.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that, man. Because that's one that
book is written. That book is fully written and has been for some time. We have a new artist on the book who actually is he has drawn the first issue and the first chapter, and he is in the process of drawing the next chapter as we speak. So I think, barring any changes, that will probably be my next Kickstarter project after the OZ, which we're going to do another Kickstarter for that.
Good for you,
third and final one, sometime in the fall.
Okay.
But yeah, so I've got OZ coming.
Good.
We're just really getting just a good critical mass of artwork. That book has also been written for some time, and Ruben Rojas is decently far along on it. We're far enough along that if I wanted to do a Kickstarter, we could, but I'd like to kind of bank a little bit more art before we start. And then there are I'm working on 2 other creator-owned projects that have not been announced yet. One of them has been long written and is about halfway finished on the art. And then the other one will be announced shortly. I'm working with the most killer artist I've worked with in some time. And we have a first issue of it. We just got the proof of it, and it looks spectacular. All I'll say is it's my first foray into horror, and hopefully not my last. So can't wait to talk with you more about it. Trust me when I say I will be hitting you up as soon as they announce it, because it is a book that I am incredibly proud of. And the artist that I'm working with I'm shocked that I was able to work with him. He is just that talented, and he's so nice, which is also problematic. But he's an artist who I plan on shouting out as much as humanly possible, because he deserves to be winning all the awards and getting all the big name horror stuff. So I'm thrilled to be working with him.
Wonderful, man. That's great. Well, like I said, I mean, going back to Spencer and Locke and everything, I always enjoy your high concepts.
Thank you.
And like I said, Grand Theft Astro is one that I'm like, all right, let's.
I can't wait. I'm working with a really fun artist on that one, and that book. It's funny. It's like it's been written. I think I finished writing it. It's been a few years.
I was going to say pre-pandemic. I'm certain of that.
Pre-pandemic, I finished writing it.
Yeah.
I'm very excited. Pretty strong. Unless something changes in the next year, that'll be the next Kickstarter project.
Okay. And the OZ is a lot of fun. I think a great spin.
Thank you.
On the Wizard of Oz that people. It's good for you for seeing what you could do with that. I mean, that's one of those great kind of public domain things that you can play with and everything and have a lot of fun with.
It's been, I'm so proud of how that book has come together. That whole team, Ruben Rojas, Whitney Kogar, Dave Hopkins, are just gems to work with. I can't say enough good things about them. I can't wait for readers to get to see what we've got in part 3. This is sort of our big, crazy finale. But who knows? Depending on what everybody's workload is, looking like in the future, who's to say we might not come back?
Good for you, man.
There's certainly room for it.
That's great, man. David, you're killing it. Seriously, way to go, man. I remember Rylan Grant telling me 3 years ago when we were putting together one of those mainframe Comic-Con online shows. And it's like, these people that I'm bringing you and stuff, they're going to be working at DC and Marvel in 3 years. and there you are. And it didn't
Ryland,
even, I think it was a little sooner than 3 years, but well done.
I love Ryland. He's a great guy. I appreciated that he gave me his blessing to use him in my Hulk annual. I don't know if you saw.
I didn't know if you wanted to tip that or not, but I thought that was great.
I asked. It's funny that up until the last minute, there are a few of my friends were all going to get named cameos in there. Tony Donnelly from Albert Einstein Time Mason, you might have seen as our sound designer. There were a couple other comic creators who we had to change the names at the very last second, just kind of based on coloring cues. That I was like, oh, these names no longer match these characters' ethnicities. We have to now change this. Dave Schrader from Baby Badass was originally the cameraman. He wound up becoming the Quick Stop employee. So yeah, it's kind of fun to give a little shout out to my fellow indie people who I kind of came up in the trenches with.
Yeah.
And I think I consider them my peers. I consider them kind of my graduating class, so to speak. And so it was sort of my way of kind of just giving them a little wink and a nod. That's the great thing about comics. And I think every creator probably feels this way to some capacity, is that like the people you come up with, those are the people that you really kind of stick with. You wind up getting mentors, from the people above you, and you try to mentor the people who are coming up, behind you. But it's those peers that like really kind of get the struggle and the successes and the heartbreak that comes with this crazy business. And so yeah, I'm always grateful to those people, and I'm grateful to all the other creators who have shouted out my work, including the like 16 people who shouted out City of the Dead ahead of Final Order Cutoff. Those are all champions. Bless all of them. And I guess since I'm plugging it, call your local comic shop, tell them to add Moon Knight City of the Dead to your pull list. I certainly wouldn't mind a sellout for that first issue. So start calling.
There you go. Here, man. It's coming out in July. So make sure you get on that, 19th. Everybody. July
19th.
July 19th. Very good. Excellent, man. Yeah. City of the Dead coming up. I'm sure you might be able to find the Hulk annual as well in the meantime, as well as the Vader Black, White, and Red that only came out a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, great job, Ryan. I was going to call you Ryland. Way to go, David. Excuse me. Way to go, Ryland.
Yeah, way to go, Ryland. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Sure.
I love catching up with you. And as soon as my next creator-owned thing, I'm going to be knocking on your door again. But it's always a pleasure. And thank you to everyone listening, and thank you to everyone who's been pre-ordering my work. It really takes a village to succeed in this business. And I see you all out there. I see you all shouting out the work, and I really, really appreciate it.
Very cool. David Pepose, thank you very much. Everybody, thanks for watching. Tomorrow, if all goes well, I believe we're set. But Rob is going to be on, Rob Liefeld.
Oh, nice.
And now we're going to talk comics, but we're also going to talk about, I love his podcast. I adore his podcast. Awesome. It's so fun. It's such a walk down memory lane. He is reliving a lot of great moments of his own and of that period. Just like you said, a lot of his peers, a lot of his mentors of the late 80s and early 90s. And I am addicted to it. It is just Rob spinning stories. It's funny.
I would love to meet him. I feel like that guy knows so much history in this business and has experienced so much. And boy, to have an opportunity to pick that guy's brain, that would be super cool. Maybe one day, knock on wood.
And he's one of the most positive guys. I mean, honestly, nothing phases him. It's always, onward and upward on everything he does and talks about, and his genuine enthusiasm for comics. I mean, there's a reason why the company was called Awesome, and it's because that's how Rob feels about comics. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That's tomorrow night, about this same time. It's going to be 7:00 West Coast time, 9:00 Chicago time, and 10:00 Eastern time. So I hope everyone will join us. Until then, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.